It looks very cozy, very inviting, and warm. There's a working fireplace, and we're sitting right in front of it, and it's giving off a really, just welcoming light. And all around us, there are floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, very nice bookshelves, possibly IKEA bookshelves.
They are indeed.
Yes, functional but also beautiful. And just pretty much every poetry book that you can think of that you would want, and you can just grab it off the shelves.
That's right. That's part of our USP here at the Poetry Pharmacy. Every poetry book, every poem you ever wanted, right here, right now for you, catalogued and carefully stored in a cool, dry place. But not too dry, not too cool. Poems need to breathe, need to talk to other poems. So a bit of warmth and moisture is also good, which is where the fireplace comes into it. And vegan marshmallows. There would be Dandy's vegan marshmallows for those in the know. The amount of marshmallows we get through in the pharmacy. I wonder if Dandy's sponsor podcasts. Dandy's, if you're listening, can we talk marshmallows and poetry at some point? The voice you just heard was that of the poet Chen Chen, describing our little pharmacy with a big mission, that of getting the poems you need most into your eyes, ears, heart, soul, lungs, between your toes. Chen is the author of a recent collection from Boa, with the fabulous title, When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a List of Further Possibilities. If you haven't already bought that, what are you waiting for? If the apocalypse is nigh, you might as well stock up on as much poetry as you possibly can. So we're going to kick things off today in the pharmacy with Chen reading a poem by Keegan Lester, which we'll then talk about, before I prescribe a poem to him from J. Dodd, and finally some Chen Chen wizardry to round things off. Hope you enjoy.
So this comes at the end of the main section from his book. This shouldn't be beautiful, but it was, and it was all I had, so I drew it. To the tin band that read Keegan Matthew Lester, 21841 Seacrest Lane, Huntington Beach, California, Eder Elementary, the one with a brontosaurus imprint on the top. To the man who told me to believe in what we could not see and called it science, before telling us they were mistaken. To the letter I received from Science a few years back. We here at Science want to apologize. We had our own misgivings, but wanted to see how it would play out. We are sorry about your brontosaurus. There are cartoons and movies and books. We were too late to call it off. Museums were doing well. People could look at the scale of our hyperbole for the first time and understand the way we love. We literally made a skeleton of hyperbole to teach you to dream again. Museums kept their lights on, due to things we made up. We got adults to make up stories for children to explain the feasibility of something so large and terrifying and confusing that only ate plants, that only a comet could have killed. Vegetarians loved us in the 90s. Now we sell drugs and will be in business for a long time. Would you like some drugs? Also Pluto, not a planet. Sorry about that too. We grew tired of discovering. We wanted to create things, just this one time. We wanted to know what it would feel like to paint rooms for an afternoon. Sorry. Sincerely, Science. To the prayer Science and I wrote together. God, rid me of God. God, help me give up credibility today so that I might be able to make something for someone else.
Thank you. So, when I read this poem, I thought, this is such a good poem to have in the pharmacy. I mean, there's certain poems that when you read them, they just have an immediate effect on your kind of neurophysiology. And I suppose like powerful drugs, you recognize that there's some powerful active ingredient in this poem that's having this effect on you.
This poem makes me feel really good. And I think a lot of it has to do with its humor. the Brontosaurus and how that comes in. But it starts off in this really incredibly personal place where we get, the poet's full name and, where they were born and this, specific place. And then it just latches on to this detail in a surprising way, the Brontosaurus imprint. And that just becomes...
Could I ask you, could I ask you, what is this tin band? I mean, it's obviously it's a childhood object.
Yeah.
But what is it? Is it do you have an image of it in your mind? Is it something... I'm just wondering if it's a kind of like an American thing that kind of American kids would have in nursery school. It's what is it exactly? What do you imagine it as?
Honestly, I don't really know either. It just seems to be this personal item. Like, I imagine it, because it's saying, like the name of the elementary school is on it. So I'm imagining that it's something school related that you would bring with you, like a lunchbox or a backpack, a keychain, some kind of, personal item that you would take with you to school. But I just love that, it has like this information on it, sort of like, one of those labels that you would get, in case something gets lost, how to return it to the owner. So that's how I'm picturing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then he goes from there into this incredible riff on science.
Yeah.
Right?
This letter from science. And I love that it's science and not scientists. It's not a person. It's this force. It's this collective force of science as a whole, writing this letter to the speaker and to the reader, really. And I just love that associative leap that it takes into this world in which a dinosaur has been made up, and science is sort of confessing its sin of having done this, and it's very apologetic, but also defensive, talking about the museums being kept open because of this invention, and the stories that children get to hear from adults. So, the poem starts to really explore the pleasure in invention, in creating something, making something up. And, even while apologizing for it. And then the poem ends up in this really wonderful space of celebrating creation. So in a way, the poem ends up being about poetry without really sort of naming that subject. It sort of goes in this back way into talking about creating in general and what does that mean. I fell in love with those last lines. God help me give up credibility today so that I might be able to make something for someone else.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about those last lines, because I kept on reading them and rereading them the first time and the second and the third and the fourth time, and there's something circular about them, right? That they have a kind of like a kind of almost mind jamming Koan like circularity to them, and I just wonder what do you take from them? Because whenever I read them, I feel like I can kind of grasp what they're saying, and then suddenly it eludes me again.
Yeah, there's something really mysterious and magical about that ending. And I feel like every time I read it in a somewhat different way. But I guess the main way that I interpret that ending would be this idea of giving up or rejecting authority, because of this letter from science. Rejecting authority in order to make something. And that creativity is rooted in this openness to new ways of looking at the world, and unusual ways of looking at the world. So that, you might make something up, like a brontosaurus, this fantastical creature. Even though dinosaurs are real, this particular one happens not to be, but that there's a sort of delight in that. And I think part of being a poet is, staying open to that, the possibility,
And yet, at the same time, there is something of that kind of Keatsian negative capability as well, right? In the sense that in giving up authority, we're also, in order to do that, we're also having to accept authority to some extent, accept certain limits, like the limits of a page, like the limits of a line, which is so perfectly captured in this very paradoxical, God rid me of God.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
How is that possible for God to rid you of God? God, help me to give up credibility. Help me to give up credibility of you.
Right.
But to give up credibility of you, I need to believe in you.
Right.
To a certain extent.
Sort of ultimate authority. It's this relationship, it's this dialogue that is pretty contradictory at its heart, but that's sort of this relating to the world, having to observe and take in what's around. I mean, I think about the relationship to language too, that there is already a knowledge and an authority in language and, in how we learn it. And, there are these rules and structures. And so in writing, at once we're kind of obeying those rules or listening to those rules, but also bending them. And so, there is this real sort of back and forth. So the God rid me of God, I think, can also apply to the medium of the poet, language.
Yeah. I mean, you referred also to that wonderful middle line where he says, where he talks about, we literally made a skeleton of hyperbole to teach you to dream again. Museums kept their lights on due to the things we made up. And I think a lovely thing there is that sometimes that distinction we sometimes make between the arts and the sciences, right? In a way, between authority and creativity, you could also put it in that way.
Right.
Is perhaps a false distinction, because here the museums of science, as it were, are being kept open for this creation.
Yeah, I mean, I love hyperbole, and I think that often poems grow out of hyperbole, out of exaggeration, or this desire to kind of augment reality. And I think of Emily Dickinson's "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." So something sort of off to the side, maybe exaggerated. I also think of the contemporary poet Mary Ruefle, who selected Keegan Lester's first book for this book prize at Slope Editions, actually. And she says something really great and funny about how poems basically begin as mistakes. But unlike other people, poets aren't trying to sort of correct their mistake. They just keep going in the direction of that mistake. And so to me, that's also related to this line about hyperbole. We made a whole skeleton out of hyperbole. That's we just kept going.
And to quote you back to yourself, or rather to quote you via Tolstoy, I think it was, you did an erasure recently of Tolstoy on that theme, where your erasure reads, if I've copied this correctly, art is the life of a mistake. It produces a new soul, different from the artist, but not. Which again, I think is very much in line with that Ruefle thought.
Yeah, and I did that erasure actually because I was kind of annoyed with Tolstoy. Like, I was reading that passage, and he was being very authoritative about art, and what artists do, and people he doesn't consider artists, the mistakes that they make in, trying to write something. And I was like, but what if there's something beautiful in those mistakes and those people who are making those mistakes who might not consider themselves artists necessarily, but so I had
so
to.
you literally undercut him, as it were. You literally erased
Yeah.
the authority and allowed some contradictory but also true truth to emerge from the text.
But it was still
Beautiful,
a kind of conversation at the same time, as I was saying earlier, because I'm still using his words. So it was very much a God rid me of God moment, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. So to stay with hyperbole, that seems like a good word to kind of jump into the next poem.
Sure.
Which is the poem I chose. And the poem is called Ars Poetic. Shall I read it for us?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about this one, yeah.
Okay. Ars Poetic. Every poem is a death, and each stanza an economy, built on an ocean floor covered in bones. Like my mouth, every poem is that same mouth, filled with loose teeth and salt water. Every poem is ship and sea and sail, a cargo passage, or the vessel obliged with displacing the poet's form. Every poem costs some mass, some measure, requires a body to expose itself, a grammar called recompense. Every poem is a rhetorical interrogation of how many questions can you fit in your mouth, or, if the jaw learns to unhinge, how will it hang? Heavy and full, be ripe fig on low branch. Each poem is the pit, the seed, the fresh, and the moulding delineate, the harvest before the drought. Or, every poem is masturbation, the gesture of naming in so many words, crafting metered stroke in lyric and verse, and still, every poem, even in its most spectacular excitement, must know how to finish itself off.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff. So it starts with this very strong statement, which, like a lot of strong statements expressed very declaratively, every poem is a death, it almost feels like an unquestionable truth.
Right.
But I was wondering, when you then think about it, I was wondering, well, in what way is that true? In what way do you find truth in that statement? Every poem is a death.
Well, on one level, maybe just kind of a basic literal level, I think about how hard poems are to write. And it can kind of feel like you're wringing yourself out, trying to put together this house of language. And so there is this sort of, the energy exerted, but I also think of a kind of shedding of skin, of like a prior self, maybe. So yeah, having to go through this tremendous and difficult experience just to write something. Every poem is a death, and each stanza. And how it follows up, an economy built on an ocean floor covered in bones like my mouth. So this really bodily process as well. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned the word house, because when I read that first line, I thought, let me look up the word economy. It's a very particular word, and just remind myself what does that mean, economy, right? And of course, economy is a careful management of available resources, but it comes from these two Greek words. One is oikos, house, and the other one is manage. So it's essentially household management. So kind of how you could say maybe how we put our sort of existential houses in order, in a way, right? But the interesting thing is that if that's the case, this house, as you say, it's quite a fragile house. It feels very mortal.
Yeah, I think of the phrase body of work too, which we often use to talk about collections of poems, someone's work, body of work. And a little later on in the poem, this part, every poem costs some mass, some measure, requires a body to expose itself. So I find the poem just very candid about these costs and the vulnerability that it takes to write something, this exposure. I think about when I received the galleys for my chapbook, this first little body of work, and I've been thinking about these poems and working on them for so long, but then it struck me, seeing them in physical form, that this was something real, and how personal the poems were, and how vulnerable. So I think that this poem really gets at that phenomenon, requires a body to expose itself. And there's, the erotic element as well in this poem. Like, it's interesting to me that it goes from death to masturbation in that last part, and this spectacular excitement. And this pun at the end, that finish, can refer to the erotic act as well as death.
Yeah, and in a way, I don't know if this was intentional, I'm sure it probably was, there is also a pun in the first line, right? There is already the masturbation in the first line because I think in French, the little death is the orgasm. Yeah. So, every poem, you could also say every poem is an orgasm.
Yeah, and the mouth is the main body part that's sort of focused on in this poem too. Every poem is that same mouth filled with loose teeth and salt water. The jaw learns to unhinge. So there's this image of how much can the body open and sort of take in of the world. There's this travel image too, the ship and sea and sail. But it's through the body.
Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier Mary, I can't pronounce her name, is it Mary Ruffel?
Ruffel, yeah.
Mary Ruffel. I was listening to an interview with her recently, and she was sort of saying something like, she wishes that someone had sat her down, although I think someone did, and she of course ignored them. Someone had sat her down when she was in her 20s and basically said, don't go into the biz.
Yeah.
Poetry at that time, it seems like the most important thing in the world, the center of the universe, but actually it's, she put it in very stark terms. She said, no one's interested in poetry, nobody reads poetry, nobody gives a shit about poetry, basically. And I wonder if in a way that this poem also kind of plays with that, again, that sort of distinction, like the distinction in the previous poem between the arts and the science, that distinction between kind of poetry being the most important thing we have, the most significant thing we have, and then also poetry almost being the most negligible thing we have. Because, of course, with that final or, right? Or, okay, it might be all of these incredibly important, meaningful, existential things, or it could just be, masturbation, which a moment of erotic excitement, a moment of self-soothing, but nothing more. Where do you kind of stand in terms of those two markers, I suppose? That kind of sense of it, of the everything and the nothing, the everything and the nothingness of poetry.
Well,
the importance and the negligibility, if that's a word, of poetry.
Well, I love how this poem gets me to think about indulgence and how writing can be an indulgence. But I also think of Audre Lorde's essay, Poetry is Not a Luxury, and just how she argues that poetry is this necessity, in part because actually this kind of pleasure is a necessity, and that often we create this sort of false dichotomy between, oh, this thing is pleasurable and this thing is serious because it isn't pleasurable, or that it's laborious, or we can tell that it's serious because it's, I think like the stereotypical image of poetry as this puzzle or this riddle that you have to decode, instead of this act of language that gives pleasure, that is something that you feel in the body. And so I think this poem is trying to collapse that dichotomy or that binary of pleasure versus something more serious, and is sort of acknowledging that every poem is masturbation, or it could be, but that there's nothing wrong with that at the same time, or that there's something to celebrate in that supposed indulgence. I love the play on words also with crafting metered stroke too. So this idea of like the rhythm and the sound, the pace of poetry, sort of being in line with this erotic act. I feel like this poem is getting at why do we make that distinction?
It does such a lot in such a short space, doesn't it? I mean, it really kind of packs it all in. Let's move to the pleasures of your poetry, Chen.
Okay. Yeah.
So, pleasure is very much a word I associate with reading you. And yet, of course, like all good pleasures, there is also... It's not a fickle pleasure. It's a deep pleasure. It's a wise pleasure. There's a lot of wisdom in these poems, which is why I prescribe them regularly to my patients. I literally do. I actually prescribed at the end of a session on Friday. I said, "Go away and read this."
Oh wow!
Because I think your poems, like really good medicine, they have that spoonful of sugar, more than a spoonful. They have that which makes the medicine go down. In terms of people actually also then being open to the wisdom. I can't really think of another word. The wisdom of the poem. So, the poem that I would love you to read, please, is the last poem in the collection. Could you give us a reading?
Sure. Poplar Street. Oh, sorry. Hello. Are you on your way to work too? I was just taken aback by how you also have a briefcase, also small and brown. I was taken by how you seem secretly to love everything. Are you my new coworker? Oh, I see. No. Still, good to meet you. I'm trying out this thing where it's good to meet people. Maybe, beyond briefcases, we have some things in common. I like jelly beans. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of farting, even around people I love. Do you think your mother loves you when you fart? Does your mother love you all the time? Have you ever doubted? I like that the street we're on is named after a tree when there are none, poplar or otherwise. I wonder if a tree has ever been named after a street, whether that worked out. If I were a street, I hope I get a good name, not Main or Pleasant. One night I ran out of an apartment down North Pleasant Street. It was soft and neighborly with pines and oaks. It felt too hopeful after what happened. After I told my mother I liked a boy and she said, "No, you're sick. Get out before you get your brother sick." Sometimes parents and children become the most common strangers. Eventually, a street appears where they can meet again. Or not. Do I love my mother? Do I have to forgive in order to love? Or do I have to love for forgiveness to even be possible? What do you think? I'm trying out this thing where questions about love and forgiveness are a form of work I'd rather not do alone. I'm trying to say, let's put our briefcases on our heads in the sudden rain and continue meeting as if we've just been given our names.
Thank you. So you were talking earlier about the work that goes into making a poem, and I suppose I was wondering, when I read this poem, and when I read any poem that I particularly admire, just a very simple question of how does a poem like this get made, just in terms of the craft? I mean, what is the genesis of a poem like this? Could you share that a bit with us?
Yeah, so it really started, I can remember specifically, it was in 2014. I was at this week-long sort of series of writing workshops, sort of a summer camp for writers, I guess. It's kind of an odd feeling. You like all wake up together and go to breakfast and then go to workshop. And our workshop instructor, for poetry, was telling us that we should try to be more specific about places. I guess he was noticing that not a lot of us were writing with specific places in poems, or like place names, and he just encouraged us to do that. And so as sort of an exercise, I just decided to give this poem that title. So I had that title, Poplar Street, and I was in Amherst, Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. I went to elementary school and middle school there. So it was like literally a walk down memory lane. So I was thinking a lot about streets, street names, and things that have happened there. And I'd already written a couple poems that I knew would go into this collection that all had to do with this night when I was 13 and tried to come out to my parents, and had this really difficult emotional confrontation with my mother. And I sort of ran out, and I thought about running away from home. And so, there are a couple poems in the book that return to that scene. And this ended up being one of them, I think, because I was just in that very associative place of thinking about street names, and I was in the town where that night had occurred, too. And so it was just another entryway into that memory, and a painful memory, too. But I wanted to try to write about it from a sort of different angle, and that's where this you in the poem comes in, this sort of imagined addressee, I guess, that the speaker is engaging with on the street, as they're walking. And so I just imagined this conversation taking place. Yeah.
And I think what makes it so incredibly skillful is how you get to this kind of moment of trauma, in the sense that you start off with, it's the framing, right, is so important. You start off with this moment of this meeting of essentially this meeting of shared humanity.
Yeah.
We have things in common. I like jelly beans. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of farting. Okay, that's a moment of shared humanity. We all, essentially, most of us, like jelly beans, or afraid of death and afraid of farting, or are ambiguous around farting. Right? And then you move, there's a little sort of indication, when you start talking about mother, and then you move into this rupture, this more ambivalent relationship between parents and children, right? Particularly this moment where that kind of unconditional love, which we hope to have and always have from our parents, breaks down in some way. One thing that was really interesting when you were reading it, because I didn't want to write on my copy of your book, I basically found the poem online and printed up a copy for myself.
Yeah.
And I noticed when you were reading, just because I've got an earlier version of it,
yeah,
that in the lines where you talk about, this person talks about telling their mother, in the earlier version, you had, after she said she was afraid of me, terrified. So it seems like there is a real moment of kind of, even though you are being attacked, or this person is being attacked, but let's say you are being attacked, there is also, it seems to me, a moment of kind of empathy for the fact that maybe her judgment, her criticism is coming from fear. And then I noticed in the version that's in the book, I only noticed it because you read it out and I had the two in front of me, that you had removed that. I'm just really interesting, what was your thinking, say, in taking that factor out and focusing more on the attack, really? I mean, you leave in what is really those cruel and kind of attacking words.
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that particular change in a while. Although I do remember, making these edits, that one and another one later on in the poem before it went in the book, as this final or just different version, I guess. And I mean, I feel okay with both versions existing. The one that you're talking about, you can just find it online. And so in a way, that aspect is still there. It just depends on sort of where you encounter the poem first. So I don't really mind that. Because, it's a good point that you make about the empathy that was there in that earlier version. But I think mainly I was just thinking that the language there felt more abstract to me and not as in the moment of someone actually having that confrontation, that conflict. And so I just wanted it to feel more immediate and also move a little more quickly. Because those words are kind of heavier, and they sort of they slow down that moment. And so I just wanted, the pain of that dialogue to come through more sharply and quickly. And I guess if I'm thinking about it now, and because the poem ends up being this difficult meditation and this unresolved meditation on forgiveness, sort of just leaves it as this open question. I think that for me, it ends up being more effective to just have that, sharp pain sort of stand and not have something mitigate it. In this particular poem, I mean, there are other
because it
pieces.
Also, yeah, absolutely, that makes complete sense, because it also renders maybe more starkly and more painfully the hurt there, which then makes that question, and this is, I was talking a little bit before, the kind of the wisdom of your poetry. It makes this very kind of wise question, do I have to forgive in order to love, or do I have to love for forgiveness to even be possible? It makes, in a way, that question so much more salient or challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering where you personally stand with that question.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I have to forgive in order to love, or do I have to love for forgiveness to even be possible?
Well, I feel like the real question of that this poem brings up is because it's looking at this situation where a mother's love seems less than unconditional, and so to me, so the question beneath it all is what can you unconditionally, like, can the speaker, can I unconditionally love someone who seems at many moments not to give that to me? And so what is the basis for unconditional love? But like the second you ask that, it seems like there are conditions, right? First, this person has to act in such and such a way for me to love them. And so I think it's an ongoing question of, what is that kind of pure or deep, serious love look like? I don't know. I think it's a really hard thing to answer, but I think that's where the important stuff happens in poetry as well as in life. When you get to those questions that are unanswerable, or you're still working through them, you're very much in that process. And so I wanted this poem to articulate that struggle of, and turning to a stranger in this case, in the poem, to ask, what do you think? Because I don't think it's something that you can wrestle through on your own.
Well, I think that those sort of essential questions are those kinds of questions, the ones you're posing in a lot of your poems, which I think also again makes them so rich and beautiful and entertaining and healing as well. Which is why we will continue to be prescribing them in the pharmacy
Thank you.
for many years to come. And I just want to thank you so much for coming in and reading and chatting and sitting in front of the fire with me, toasting a couple of marshmallows.
Yeah.
It's been really, really fun having you.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I love poetry and marshmallows, so yeah.
It's a perfect combination.
It's great.
Okay, thanks, Chen.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. If so, please could you do us a short but hopefully very sweet review on iTunes? That would really help publicise the podcast further. And don't forget, we're on Twitter also as Poetry Pharmacy, and if you're wanting a prescription, we're more than happy to provide one. Just DM us or tweet whatever's ailing you, big or small, and we'll find you a poem. You can also email thepoetrypharmacy@gmail.com. One final thing, in the next year I'm involved in a fundraising project called 52 Poems in 52 Weeks, where I'm trying, as the name suggests, to learn 52 great poems like the ones you've heard today in 52 weeks. I'm currently on my 4th week, I think. It's all to raise some money for the Safe House Education College Fund in Kenya, a charity set up about 15 years ago to help young Maasai girls escape from FGM and childhood marriage, as well as providing them with primary and secondary education. And if you want to see me doing my cover version recitals of the poems, you can watch that on the YouTube channel, 52 Poems in 52 Weeks. Great if you subscribe, but even more so than subscribing, please, a small donation, a large donation, even just a couple of bucks to the sponsorship page, link on this website, would be so very much appreciated. What else? Yes, some fantastic poetry collection prizes on offer for those subscribing £5 or even $5 or more. Check it out by following the link on the episode page. Thanks for listening, and take care until we next meet in the Poetry Pharmacy. Bye.